Okay, I've got all the panels cut out. I've got short panels for the center section. I'm going to leave it open down through the middle here. I've got the back seat, I've got the seat tops done, side panel stuff. All taken apart. And then I want to give these all a coat too, inside and out. Tops and bottoms with epoxy to seal them off. Also, I want to make certain that all the parts that are inside these contained areas are coated with epoxy. Besides the insides and edges of the panels, I want to make certain that the hull is that way too. I will probably go ahead at this time when I'm doing the cross members, skim coat the whole hull on the inside after I've vacuumed it down a couple times and wiped it out with a dry cloth. I'll go ahead and feel around for any bumps that I can't see, like drops of epoxy that never show up until you paint it and you say, "Duh." And you looked over it 100 times and you went right on by it. So I'll feel the whole insides down and sand down any spots that need it. Also, any rough edges along the fiberglass. It's always nice to take like maybe an old sock or something like that and rub all the edges of the fiberglass tape to see if there's any hooks there that are going to snag you later on, make you go look for first aid. So that'll be that step right now. I've got pretty much everything that I want to do finished off. I've taken my panels and taken a big old pink pearl, erased all the pencil marks, especially if you're going to skim coat it and leave it a natural finish. I paint them, but it's always nice to take the pencil marks off. Just looks better. I've been taking my calipers and going through and measuring all the pieces up, because now I got to draw up all the plans so somebody else will want to make it, if someone else wants to make them. Sometimes I think my designs are a little too complicated for the average person to construct, but it's not that difficult if you take your time. So I'll be making up the plans now. I've got the interior pieces all cut out. You can see that I've got the inside of the hull has all been cleared. So it's got a consistent, even finish now. I wanted to mainly get all the places inside where it's going to be boxed in. I wanted to get them covered with epoxy to seal off the wood. I will probably give these areas another skim coat before I call it finished, because when the next thing I'm going to do is show you how to put on two thin coats of epoxy onto your plywood without wasting a whole lot of epoxy. A lot of people brush it on. When I first started, I was brushing the stuff on, and I'd put it on really thick. You'd think it was thin, but it wasn't. I've gotten now to where I use either an old credit card or a metal taping knife from the sheetrock to spread it out. A little bit of epoxy goes a long way. So we'll be doing that on the next thing when we go to the floor again. I just wanted to show you how the boat's coming along, and so that'll be the next thing of taking all the panels on the inside. I'll do the outside after everything is all filleted and taped all together, and then I will do a skim coat over everything again. Right now I'm just going to concentrate on the insides. I've marked the positions and their locations in pencil, and that I will leave, or I may transfer up into here where they'll be glued behind. But right now you're not going to be able to stick your head in a 6-inch porthole to read what's written on the inside of them. So okay, we're going to start by mixing up some epoxy. I like to use System 3 silver tip laminating resins. Good stuff. It goes on well. You can skim it down to a thin coat, and you got, like I said before, 2 to 3 days before you have to sand in order to put it on again and get a chemical bond besides just a mechanical bond. One of the things I do is I like to get the small plastic cups. I never mix any more than 3 ounces at a time. This is going to be 1.5 ounces. I've marked off with tape because the little lines are too hard to see, but I also use these as a check when I'm using the pump I've got the pump set up with these mustard cans. That one full push on the A gets me up to that blue mark. This one has been set to half. One long push on it gets me up to that mark there. Now it's a minute and a half stir and we'll be back. Okay, we've got our epoxy mixed up. It's got some bubbles in it. That's another nice sign I like to see that I've got a good mix. Scraping the bottom, scraping the sides, get it all mixed up. You don't want any spots where there's not a good mix. I've also brought out a new toothbrush which I will use to paint the epoxy on the seams, but before I do that I'm going to give it a skin coat and just pour out a little bit of epoxy. Doesn't take much at all. That's probably more than necessary for doing this one flat. Just kind of move it around. You'll know when you got plenty when it turns dark and you don't have any dry spots. And you can see it's going over the edge, so you don't need to do the edges first. You'll have more than enough when you get done. Just scrape all the way around, fill in those dry spots. Doesn't take a whole lot. I've also found too, if you don't have one of these around, an old AARP card works just as well. Especially in smaller, tighter areas where you want to get in and maybe not carry as much epoxy over to that edge. One thing I forgot to show when I was doing the initial epoxying, I had zoomed in too close. It became a semi out of focus. I'm not real proud of that, but I couldn't show you my the brushwork, and it just a little bit of epoxy up and down with the paintbrush or the toothbrush is fine. The other thing I do to save my toothbrushes, I take an old jug, an old plastic jug, and put some vinegar in it. You put your brushes and toothbrushes and those kinds of things in the vinegar, or if you got some on your hand or on some tools, just wet a cloth down with some vinegar and then clean it up. It removes epoxy, fresh epoxy, just perfect. So it's kind of a safety thing I keep around, and also to keep my tools in pristine shape. The first coat of epoxy is cured, and I've got a nice satin finish, and there's not a lot of lumps because the scraping does a pretty good job of putting it on. What I have to do now is, I've been trying to decide on this boat which size of hatch I'm going to use. I'm going to use quarter-turn hatches I get down from Chuck at Duckworks. So, you know, we got my leftover blanks from other boats from 4, 6, and 8 inch. I was going to try to use a 6 inch on one of my side panels here, but when I got to measuring it around, I didn't have enough room for the backing block. The 1/4 inch plywood is just too thin to put the hatches, the frames of the hatches on, and screw them in. So I always double it up to a full 1/2 inch. And so on this one, I wanted to use 6 inches because getting your hand inside of a 4 inch opening is just too hard. So I'm going with 6 inches on the middle compartments, on the outside of the middle seats. And I'm going to go with the 8 inch on the forward side of the aft seat and the aft side of the forward seat, to be able to store rain gear, food, water, whatever you have. So, long story short, I've got my blanks of the 6 inch. I downloaded from Duckworks the information for the size of the hatches, the rings, and then they came in at about 8 1/2 inches. So I'm cutting out 4 1/4 or 8 1/2 inch circles that will then be epoxied onto this, and then the hole will be cut later. So I've got all that done now. I've got the 2 for the side hatches, the middle seat, and the bow and the stern seat. So next thing I do is go to my tables or my bandsaw and cut these pieces out, and then epoxy them to the plates that they'll go to.